Good morning, Mr Lloyd.
Morning, Your Honour. Morning, Commissioner. Your Honour and Commissioner will recall that this hearing has been reconvened for the limited purpose of taking the evidence of Mr Christopher Fotis. During the hearing in February and March of this case study, Mr Fotis was called pursuant to a summons but failed to appear. Mr Fotis, as I understand it, is here today, and I'll call him to give his evidence shortly. Before I do that, I understand there's an application for leave by Ms Bateman, who appears for Mr Fotis, and also a further application by Mr Stapleton, and I might invite those representatives to make their applications. Yes.
Your Honour, Commissioner, my name is Stapleton. I appear on behalf of Ms Leslie Saddington and also Philip Carden. There was a written application made to the Commission yesterday by my instructing solicitors, Osborne's lawyers. I understand so far there hasn't been a response to that. In terms of the substance of the application, my clients believe, and I believe have had confirmed, that the person with the pseudonym ATP is actually the son of Ms Leslie Saddington and Philip Carden. Accordingly, in my respectful submission, there is a direct and substantial interest as family members in having an involvement and a participation in the proceedings. In respect of what my clients are seeking to achieve, at the very least what they're seeking to achieve is
Appreciate that this morning's sitting of the Commission is really for one single purpose, and that otherwise the evidence is closed.
Your Honour, I do understand that. So the second application is, as Your Honour describes, a separate application and
for one single purpose, and that otherwise the evidence is closed.
Your Honour, I do understand that. So the second application is, as Your Honour describes, a separate application and presupposes that leave is granted in the first place. So I understand that there is an initial hurdle that must be overcome before the second application can even be entertained. In terms of the convenience or inconvenience that might be said to the Commission of this late application, in terms of my instructions, Your Honour, I received those instructions yesterday afternoon at approximately 3 o'clock. I've canvassed with my client and my instructing solicitor how it is that I'm here today making this application rather than the application being made.
has been lifted. His pseudonym was ATP, and it has been lifted. That occurred after the conclusion of the hearing in March. Secondly, I do not oppose the application for leave to appear, and nor would I oppose Mr Stapleton having the opportunity to have access to the exhibits and other relevant material that's been tendered and has been available to the other parties who've had leave, and nor would I oppose him having the opportunity of making written submissions, and if there is an occasion for oral submissions on behalf of his clients. As I understand it, presently there's no application made to have the Commission recall Dr Patterson or to call any further witnesses. But if, in case I've got that wrong, and even if I haven't, I should indicate that my position would be to oppose any such application for two reasons. One, the lateness of it. Even if that application had been made as recently as a week or two ago, it may have been more viable to have accommodated it because perhaps witnesses could have been recalled today. But having been notified of it late, and I'm not being critical of Mr Stapleton, it's just not possible to accede to the application in any way other than to have this hearing reconvene on yet a further date in circumstances where the sole purpose of reconvening today was to take the evidence of Mr Fotis. The second reason is that the institutional response to the information about Mr Carden and his relationship with ARZ has been explored in considerable detail in the evidence already. Dr Patterson was examined about it at length. The file note, which is tab 27, has been explored with a number of witnesses, and the institutional response to the information about Mr Carden and ARZ is a matter that will be the subject of submissions, and so it is unclear that there's any real purpose in having Dr Patterson recalled or any additional witnesses called to explore the institutional response to this matter.
In terms of any assistance it would give the Royal Commission?
Quite.
Well, perhaps I'll let you mull over that, Mr Stapleton. I won't deal with the second part. Does anyone else want to be heard in the second part with respect to the application for leave, application to reopen and recall witnesses? Just with respect to the application for leave to appear, Mr Stapleton's application, does anyone else at the bar table want to be heard on that? No. So with respect to the application simpliciter for leave to appear, Mr Stapleton, in those circumstances and given the attitude of Mr Lloyd, I will grant that application so that your clients are given leave to appear for the purposes as outlined by Mr Lloyd. And at this stage, it will mean that your client is in a position through you and your instructors to provide written submissions in the submission process that will be announced at the close of the proceedings today, and we'll return to the second part of the second application after we've dealt with the witness before the Commission today.
Thank you, Your Honour.
I think that leaves us with Ms Bateman's application.
Make an application for leave to appear for Mr Fotis.
Yes, I think that application's already been made and granted, so I confirm that confirm that leave's been granted.
I just note that I don't have a pseudonym list, and I seek one. Thank you.
Christopher Fotis.
Mr. Fotis, do you wish to take the oath or the affirmation?
Affirmation, please.
Can you repeat after me, please? I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
in this Royal Commission
in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Fotis. Take a seat where you are, please. Thanks, Mr. Knox.
What is your name?
Christopher Fotis.
Mr. Fotis, would you agree that you've been a bit hard to find?
Objection.
I'll withdraw the question. Were you making attempts during the hearing of this case study in February and March to evade the attempts of the Commission to locate you?
Objection.
I'll press the question.
Commissioner, Mr. Fotis takes the position he wasn't served with a summons, contrary to the position that the Commission, rather the Council assisting, it seems, has taken.
The attempts of the Commission to locate him.
Yes, right.
Mr. Fotis, do you remember the question?
Yes.
Were you making attempts to
I
evade?
did what I was legally entitled to do. I was a free man without any legal obligation, and I based my movements upon that.
Is there any reason why it is that you have not wanted to appear at this Commission to give evidence?
Objection. Relevance.
I press the question. Relevant ultimately to evaluating Mr. Fotis's evidence on a number of topics.
Well, he's answered that question, Your Honour. He's answered the reason why he was not here. He's not required to be here unless he's served with a summons, and he wasn't served with a summons.
Well, this is a separate question, however, with respect to whether or not, as I've understood the question, whether or not there was any reason he had for not wanting to attend before the Commission, which is a separate issue as to whether or not he was lawfully compelled to.
Well, it's patently obvious why someone might not want to come to this Commission.
Well, it's a question of the witness.
Commissioner, please.
Thanks, Mr. Lloyd.
Mr. Fotis, is there any reason why it is that you've not wanted to appear at this Commission to give evidence?
As I say, I was a free man, legally entitled to move about anywhere where I wanted. I'm a private person. This is a very public hearing. And I suppose if there is any reason, then it comes down to that. I'm a private person.
Do you remember when you first came to be associated with Knox Grammar School?
Yes.
When was that?
While I was studying, I had a practical there.
Was that in about June of 1986?
That sounds right. I can't be certain.
And did you go along to the school, as you say, for a practical visit?
Yes, I spent 3 to 4 weeks there.
And you enjoyed your time there?
Yes, I thought it was good. I liked the school.
And you made an application, didn't you, in July of 1986 for a position on the teaching staff, correct?
I'm not sure if you call it an application. I indicated to Dr. Patterson that I would be interested in teaching there when I graduated.
Did you have an interview with Dr. Patterson on about 18 July 1986?
That sounds about right, consistent. I think after or towards the end of the practical, I let it be known to my supervising teachers that I would like to teach there, and that was arranged, I think. I do have a vague recollection of a meeting with him.
Can I just show you a document? You got a copy? I'll hand up 2 copies. I'll just get that shown on the screen, John. Just, if we can, Mr. Fotis, if you just turn over the page and look at the sign off at the bottom, and then go back to the start. This is a letter from you to Dr. Patterson. You see that?
Yes.
And you sent this letter to Dr. Patterson sometime around July 1986, correct?
I don't dispute that. I don't actually remember it.
We'll just have a look in the first paragraph, if you would. You mentioned a brief interview you had with Dr. Patterson on 18 July this year.
Yes.
And in that interview, you gave expression to your desire to serve at Knox as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And then you say, in an effort to demonstrate how strong the desire is, you volunteered your services in any capacity that Dr. Patterson saw fit for the remainder of the year.
Yes.
Does that assist your recollection about the interview with Dr. Patterson?
No, not really.
And do you remember at any time before you were added to the teaching staff at Knox being asked to provide any references?
No.
Do you remember any question being asked of you as to whether you had a criminal record?
No. Well, sorry, I do remember that I wasn't asked that.
And so you obviously weren't asked that in the interview you've referred to with Dr. Patterson on 18 July 1986?
Yes.
And your evidence is you weren't asked that question about whether you had a criminal record at any other time?
That's right.
The position was, as at 18 July 1986, you did have a criminal record?
Section 13, subsection 1 of the Criminal Records Act. Commissioner, I do have a copy for you. It speaks for itself. I believe that the council assistant has been alerted to this issue. I might provide a copy to yourself. There are a number of copies of the there are a number of sections that I've handed up there that are part of the Criminal Records Act. Section 13, subsection 1 is the last section. It consists of 2 pages and it should be on the second last page of that bundle. Simply not something that's able to be disclosed if it is the case.
What do you make of the words "without lawful authority"?
I say that there is nothing in the Act that indicates there is lawful authority to do so.
Which Act is that?
That is the Criminal Records Act.
What about the Royal Commission Act?
And nor the Royal Commissions Act.
I press the question. There's, for any number of reasons, but I'll just limit myself to the obvious ones. Lawful authority, as referred to in section 13.1, plainly could encompass authority given by another Act of Parliament. That's the first proposition, and there could be no relevant argument to the contrary of that proposition. The second point is that the question that is asked is plainly relevant to the scope and purpose of this case study, because it goes, as we've seen before during the hearings in February and March, to the question of the institutional response, including the systems in place about the employment of teachers and whether there were criminal or reference checks. That matter is plainly within the terms of reference of the Royal Commission, and there therefore is lawful authority. There might be a separate answer to the point in that the question itself, even if the witness answers it the way one might expect, having regard to the evidence already heard by the Commission, would not breach the subsection anyway, because the question itself doesn't disclose any information concerning a spent conviction by me or the Commission. It invites an answer by Mr. Fotis. For those reasons, I press the question.
Might I just indicate a couple of things about that, Commissioner? One is that there's an indication in the Criminal Records Act what would be lawful authority. It specifies certain disclosures by law enforcement agencies and specifies those agencies. There also are further agencies specified in the regulations to the Criminal Records Act, indicating a raft of different bodies.
Sorry, where are you when you say there's a definition of lawful authority?
There isn't a definition of lawful authority, no.
So what do you mean?
That there are a number of provisions within the Criminal Records Act that indicate that provide that that there isn't an offence if the disclosures are made in specified circumstances by specified bodies, those specified bodies being law enforcement agencies who are defined in subsection 5 of section 13 of the Criminal Records Act. Does not include the Royal Commission, and there is also all other bodies that are provided for under the regulations. That's at paragraph O of the definition of law enforcement agency in subsection 5 of section 13, and in that regulation it does not specify the Royal Commission or any Royal Commission for that matter. So in my submission, it is not something that the Royal Commission can simply just ignore, and even if it does, Mr Fotis is entitled, by virtue of section 12, which is the page before, to answer any question that is put to him by counsel assisting, or any other person for that matter, as if he's referring to any non-spent conviction. So it's a pointless exercise regardless. But my submission initially
So it's a separate issue.
That is a separate issue. It would go nowhere anyway. But if the Royal Commission had authority to, rather, if counsel assisting, rather, I really think it's probably more the section 13, subsection 1. And it may leave persons open to criminal penalty. That is not Mr Fotis, but persons within the Commission.
Your Honour, the fact that the Royal Commission isn't mentioned in subsections 2 through 5 is utterly irrelevant. That those subsections deal with specific matters, but the fact that they don't include the Royal Commission doesn't suggest for one moment that the Royal Commission couldn't exercise lawful authority to make a disclosure. that submission should be rejected. In my submission, I repeat the submissions that I've already made, and I press the question.
It seems to me, Ms. Bateman, it's quite a separate question with respect that the Criminal Records Act is directed at quite a separate question. Do you say that that any conviction or convictions being referred to would be caught under the spent convictions provision?
Only spent convictions.
So I'm not sure what you're answering.
I'm answering your question, Commissioner. I'm not saying all convictions. I'm saying only spent convictions.
Sorry, I didn't make myself clear. The question that Mr. Lloyd wants to put, do you say it touches, if at all, only upon spent convictions with respect to your client?
The question, yes, it was asking at a time prior to a particular date, which clearly would be a spent, given that the spent conviction period is a 10-year period.
Sorry, I should just add, even if the point's good, and I don't accept for a minute that it is, that the proper approach is not the objection, but to seek a non-publication order. That there can't seriously be said that this Royal Commission is not entitled to explore this matter with this witness. It is centrally relevant to the scope and purpose of the hearing.
Yes. It seems to me that the question itself is not objectionable in that I don't take the view that it is in breach of 13.1 to put the question to this witness. If that's the way in which the objection is being taken.
Well, if this witness is compelled to answer and it falls foul of it, then the Commission will be publishing it, and then that will fall foul of 13.1 of the Criminal Records Act. And if that is the case, then then the way to deal with that would be to close the Commission and to cut the live stream.
I oppose that too. My point merely was that the submission that's made by way of objection is not a proper approach. The only proper application is for a non-publication order. If that application is made, I will oppose that as well, because this is not an appropriate matter for a non-publication order. It's in the public interest.
Mr. Lloyd, the lawful authority granted to the Commission, which seems to me to be, I don't follow the argument with respect to Ms. Bateman's proposition that lawful authority, is caught by the works law enforcement agency. It seems to me they're quite separate issues. But the lawful authority of the Commission, can you take me to the Act, the Royal Commissions Act?
Just pardon me.
Another way of doing this is to leave this issue to one side and proceed, and we'll come back to it.
I might deal with it that way if it's convenient. Just pardon me. Mr. Fotis, is it fair to say that when you wrote the letter, it's in front of you, you were very keen to obtain a position teaching at Knox?
Yes.
You liked what you saw about the culture of the school?
Yes.
And you thought it would be a good opportunity for your career to teach there?
Yes.
You obtained... I will withdraw that. I tender that letter. It's not presently in the tender bundle.
23.73.
You came to be employed as a teacher the following academic year, correct?
Yes.
And you were teaching religious education?
Yes.
You're teaching any other subjects?
History.
Now, at some time around when you started as a teacher, you also applied for the position of resident master. Is that right?
No, I didn't.
Did you come to be employed as a resident master at the school?
Yes, I did.
And how did that come about?
Well, I had taken I think it was in the second year of teaching at Knox, I'd taken a flat tet in the area in Billyard Avenue, which is not very far away from Knox, in order to be closer to work. I had been doing a lot of travelling at the time between Knox, Neutral Bay and the Southern Highlands. This was a way of reducing my travelling time to some extent. That seemed to be suitable initially, but as I found out, it was very noisy. It was a wooden floor upstairs, and the lady wore high heel shoes, a lot of noise coming downstairs. And also, as the months got colder, it was very mist prone. As a result of my lack of satisfaction with that accommodation, I began looking around for something else, and I mentioned to Dr. Patterson that I was looking for accommodation in the area and asked him whether he was aware of any. A couple of weeks passed, I think, and he mentioned a possibility of accommodation down the road at quite a large house where an old lady was living by herself. She apparently had contacted the school, proposing that perhaps a teacher could lodge there in some capacity and give her some security, having someone else in the house. And Dr. Patterson mentioned it to me as a possibility, so I went down to see her. That didn't eventuate for reasons I don't quite understand. I think the children stepped in and took care of her. And that's where it was. And then I think about a month later, I can't be sure of the dates, a long time ago, Dr. Patterson did ask me how that went, and I said nothing came of it. And then later on, he approached me and said, look, I've got a vacancy in the boarding house. Are you interested?
And what did you say?
I said, yes.
And was the boarding house that Dr. Patterson was referring to McNeil House?
Yes, it was.
And that was then, to your knowledge, a residence for boys in years 8 and 9?
That's right.
And did you take up the position Dr. Patterson offered?
Yes, I did.
And doing the best you can, was it sometime in 1988, that is the year after you started as a teacher at Knox, that you took up that position?
I believe so, yes.
Do you recall the layout of McNeil House?
Yes, yes.
Can you tell the Commission what you recall about that?
Well, that's quite involved, but...
Well, let me ask you some specific questions then. Do you recall that there was a security type door which allowed entry into the ground level of McNeil House from the outside?
Yes.
And was that door usually locked of an evening?
During winter, yes. As the months were warmer, it was quite often open. I recall returning quite late there regularly and just walking through that door.
But there was a staircase which led to the dormitories on the top floor of the building?
There were two.
Two staircases?
Yes.
The dormitories were located on the top floor?
Well, there were two in addition to the fire escapes.
Now, how many dormitories were there?
4.
And how many boys in total?
Approximately 60 to 70.
And do you recall how many resident masters there were during the time that you filled that position?
Well, resident masters, okay. 3 or 4.
Do you remember who they were? The other ones were?
Certainly remember Mr. Vance. I remember Andrew Steele Smith was in there. And...
remember a Mr. Bradford?
Well, yes, I do remember another, but before this commission I wouldn't have remembered that name.
When you say before this commission, have you been following the evidence that was given during the
No, I
hearings
wasn't following it.
And do you now know that Mr Bradford's given evidence?
Yes,
How do you know that?
I have looked at the evidence.
And the room that you occupied in McNeil House, was it located on the top floor?
Yes.
And were there other rooms up there on that floor occupied by resident masters?
Yes.
And were those rooms fairly close to the dormitories?
They were in between the dormitories.
The idea was that whichever resident master was on duty should be sufficiently close to hear any commotion that occurred overnight, correct?
I don't know if that was the idea.
Was
Sorry,
that,
I can't answer that question.
Was that your experience?
No.
Was the system that there'd be one of the employed resident masters on duty at any given time during the evening?
Yes, there should always have been a resident master.
And that was because you needed some adult on duty overnight in case there was some unforeseen event or otherwise to deal with the boys if they were misbehaving and that sort of thing, correct?
Yes, I suppose so.
And if there were noises from the dormitory, the resident master who was on duty would go in and quell the noise or deal with whatever it was that was occurring.
Yes, if he heard it.
And was it your experience when you were a resident master on duty that you could hear commotions in the dormitory?
Sometimes, depending on how loud they were.
Certainly in your experience, if there was a loud commotion, you'd hear it if you're in your room.
Depends which dorm it was, depends how loud it was, and it depends whether or not I was asleep or awake, or if I had music on. There would be a whole lot of variable factors. And of course, it would depend upon whether I was there.
We'll come back to that topic, Mr Fotis. Do you remember in the latter part of 1988 that there were a number of occasions when you gave alcohol to boys in your room?
No, I don't remember a number of occasions, but I have, having thought about this for some time now, record one situation.
What was that?
Where ARA had a sip, a very small sip, of port.
But what? I withdraw that. Was that matter, to your knowledge, ever brought to the attention of anyone more senior than you at Knox?
Not to my knowledge.
Did anyone in a position of greater seniority than yours ever speak to you about that matter?
I'll take that back. Stuart Pearson apparently had knowledge of it because he did approach me about the issue. Sorry, I was thinking of in the teaching hierarchy.
Were you cautioned by Mr Pearson or anyone else in relation to that matter?
No, I wasn't cautioned. He simply asked me, did you give David Anderson a drink? Or whether ARI was mentioned, but when the But when ARA was mentioned, I took it to be at the time when ARI and ARA were together, the same incident.
Do you remember a separate incident involving ARV where you gave him alcohol in your room?
No, that's nonsense. I don't even recall that name, I'm afraid.
You sure about that?
Yes,
You don't recall Mr Pearson speaking to you about that incident?
absolutely not.
And you've got no recollection, I take it, of speaking to Dr Patterson or Dr Hawkes about
No.
any incident involving ARV?
Is there a statement by ARB, like there was from ARA?
Well, it's not my
about
job,
that?
not my job to answer your questions, but if tab 6 can be shown, in order to refresh your memory, the last page. You see, this is a note which records an event in term 4, week 5, 1988, 9:05 p.m.
I can't see the
You
date.
scroll back up the top. Term 4, week 5, 1988, 9:05 p.m. You see that?
Yes, I see it says that.
After prep, when I went to Mr Fotis's room and knocked on the door to get my RE book marked. See that?
Yes,
And he saw you drinking out of a silver beer mug. See
yes.
that? If you go down to the next paragraph, he says that you said to him, "Here, try some. Don't take too much. It's expensive."
Yes, I
See that?
see that that's written.
He handed the mug to me and I took a sip. See that?
Yes.
And you said, according to this note, "What do you think of it?" See that?
No, I'm having trouble finding it, I'm sorry.
It's about the 5th last line from the bottom.
Oh, yes, I see that now, yes.
He said, it's all right. Then he handed back the mug to you. Now, having looked at that
Yes.
note, does that refresh your memory about an incident of that nature involving ARV?
No,
And you don't remember speaking to Mr Pearson or anybody else about that sort of an incident?
that's right.
Do you deny that that incident
No, I
occurred?
do deny that.
Now, I want to ask you some questions about some events which occurred on the 22nd and 23rd of November 1988. I'll start with this question, Mr Fotis. Do you have a recollection of being aware of an incident during your time at McNeil House involving a person wearing a balaclava sexually assaulting one of the boys?
I do now.
When did you first have a recollection about that?
Well, I was aware of it at the Royal Commission. I wasn't aware prior to the Royal Commission of an incident involving a balaclava.
And so when you say you were aware of it at the Royal Commission, do you say that the first time you had any knowledge or recollection about that sexual assault by someone wearing a balaclava was in the last couple of months? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's right.
No knowledge or recollection about any such matter prior to then?
No.
Do you now recall that ARN says that he was sexually assaulted during the evening or early morning of 23 November 1988?
No, I don't have that recollection.
Do you remember ARN?
Yes.
Do you remember saying to ARN on the evening of 22 November 1988, or at any time, words like this: "I've got a surprise for you tonight," or "I'm going to get you tonight"?
No, and I noticed that he doesn't say that either.
Do you have a recollection of saying those words to him at any time?
No.
Do you deny that you said those
Yes, I
words
do.
to him? You sure about that?
Yes.
Do you recall saying to ARN on any other occasion when you ran into him physically on the stairs and he said, "Don't touch me," and you responded, "Why, don't you like being touched?"
No, I didn't say that.
Do you deny it?
I do.
Do you remember sometime around the late evening of 22 November 1988 or the early morning of 23 November 1988 having a cup of tea or cups of tea with Mr Vance in your room?
No, not in my room.
Yes.
I can't remember Mr. Vance being in my room very often at all. He had a much bigger room than I did. And if we did share a drink, it would have been in his room.
Do you remember having tea or anything to drink with Mr Vance late in the evening of 22 November or early in the morning of 23 November in his room?
Look, no, I don't have a direct memory of it. All I know is that time of year was very busy for me.
You mentioned you'd read some of the material which had emerged during the hearing. You remember that?
Yes?
You know that he says that on the late in the evening or early in the morning, 23 November 1988, he remembers having tea with you.
Yes, he did say that, and I don't have a direct memory of it. That's not to say that we didn't. It's just a long time ago.
Could have happened,
That's right.
but you just don't remember one way or the other.
That's right.
You'd certainly agree that if it did happen the way Mr Vance said, that indicates that in all likelihood you were in residence, that is to say, in McNeil House on that evening of the 22nd of November 1988.
Objection.
Oh, it's been answered. And being in residence, the likelihood is that you remained in residence into the early hours of the following morning.
Yes.
Do you have any recollection that in the early hours of the morning of 23 November 1988, ARN woke up and raised the alarm in response to a person wearing an older style Knox tracksuit and wearing a balaclava who was fondling his genitals while positioned under his bed?
No.
Do you remember anyone knocking on your door in the early part of that morning?
No.
Do you remember there being any commotion in and around the top level of McNeil House on that day?
Objection. Just seek some clarity about that day. Are we dealing with the 22nd?
I'll
or
withdraw the
23rd?
question and I'll ask it again. Do you remember there being any commotion in and around the top level of McNeil House on the morning of the 23rd of November 1988?
No, not the top level.
Do you remember any occasion when there were a number of boys, to your knowledge, running around the top level of McNeil House chasing a person who was said to be an intruder?
No. Oh, no. Well, there was the night before, there was a bit of commotion from that dorm. The boys had barricaded themselves in that dorm.
Sorry, the night before what?
The day he's referring to, which is the 22nd or 23rd of November.
So do you have a specific recollection of a barricading incident on the evening of the 22nd of November 1988?
Yes.
When did you first have that recollection?
Upon seeing an extract from the duty book.
And what was the barricading incident, to your recollection?
The boys earlier in the night apparently had stripped the beds of the year 8 in that dorm. And there was some commotion. I went to check it out and the door was barricaded. And for the reason to keep the year 9s out from...
Returning to your knowledge of any event on the morning of the 23rd of November 1988,
Yes.
I take it from what you told the Commission earlier about where your room was positioned by reference to the dormitories, that it's pretty likely that the noise of someone running along the top level and out down the stairs, out the door, being chased by a number of boys at about, say, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning is something that you would have probably heard.
If it was on the top level, then perhaps yes, but
Well, that's the assumption I'm asking you to make.
yes, I would think so.
It'd be extraordinary if you didn't.
I don't know about extraordinary. I've slept through earthquakes in Greece, which have been extremely heavy, so I can't agree to that.
It'd be pretty unlikely that you wouldn't have been roused by Dr. Hawkes banging loudly on your door, correct?
Well, if Dr. Hawkes did bang on my door, I would think that I would have heard it. Mind you, I may have just woken up as a result, but it wasn't the custom of anyone to bang on resident master's door to rouse them, because there was an alarm, not an alarm, but a hooter or some such thing to wake people up. And if you weren't on duty, well, you weren't the person who was supposed to set that off, and you're under no obligation to wake up upon those bells going off.
But you know from following the evidence given to this commission that the events of this morning were extraordinary, don't you?
That seems to be, yes.
Because what was thought to be the case was that there was an intruder who'd sexually assaulted a boy.
Yes.
And so what normally occurred isn't necessarily what you'd expect to occur in such an extraordinary event, right?
That's right.
And so I'll return to my question. If Dr. Hawkes had banged loudly on your door, it's very likely, if you were in the room, you would have heard it, correct?
Yes, if that occurred.
But you have no recollection of hearing Dr. Hawkes bang on your door.
That's right.
And I think you've already told the Commission you don't recall being woken up by boys running around on the top level chasing a person out of the building.
No, I don't. But I don't think that that's what's being alleged.
Do you remember being interviewed by Mr. Stuart Pearson in the period after 23 November 1988 about what had occurred with ARN?
No.
Do you deny that he interviewed you?
I do deny that.
Mr. Fotis, you recall you took an affirmation to tell the truth?
Yes.
You know that there are consequences if you don't adhere to that
Yes.
obligation, don't you? You know you might be charged with perjury.
Yes, that's right.
I'll return to the question. Do you deny that Mr. Pearson interviewed you about an incident involving a sexual assault on ARN?
I've answered the question and I said no.
The same objection. He's answered the question, and the prefacing little dialogue is really just a method of bullying, and I object to that as well.
I'll suggest to you that Mr. Pearson interviewed you, and in response to questions that he asked you, you were evasive about where you were during the time of the
I've
assault.
answered that question, that I deny that he interviewed me, and therefore that question means nothing to me.
Are you aware that there were a number of boys and members of the teaching staff who held the belief that the perpetrator of the assault on ARN was you?
I am now.
Do you say that you were not aware of that suspicion at the time?
That's the case, yes.
And are you also aware that a number of people have given evidence that the news of the assault on ARN spread like wildfire through the dormitory and the school?
Yes, I did notice that a number of witnesses gave those opinions and speculated as much.
And you, as one of the 4 resident masters in McNeil House, who you know was thought to be suspected by many of having perpetrated the crime, say that you weren't. Allow me to finish the question.
Just wait till the question's put to you, Mr. Fotis.
Say to this commission you had no knowledge of this incident at the time. Is
Object
that
to the
right?
question. It's been asked and answered, John.
President, I'm just exploring.
I don't think that particular question has been asked and answered.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Certainly. And you, as one of the 4 resident masters in McNeil House, who you know was thought to be suspected by many having perpetrated the crime, say to the Commission you had no knowledge of this incident. Is that seriously your evidence?
I didn't know that I was suspected of this incident.
Did you know about the incident at the time?
No.
Did you go to breakfast that morning on the 23rd of November, 1988?
Probably not. It wasn't my habit to have breakfast in the dining room unless I was on duty. There was a small McNeil only resident master's area which had a little kitchenette. I had my own office on the main grounds, and if I was up early I would go there, perhaps after having a cup of coffee in my room. It's never been my habit to have breakfasts, but a couple of cups of coffee, a few cigarettes, and away I go.
I'll ask you this question, Mr. Fotis. Was it you who assaulted ARN?
No.
Do you remember speaking to Dr. Patterson in the aftermath of the assault on ARN?
Yes, I do recall having a couple of conversations with Dr. Patterson.
And what happened in
that time?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What happened in those conversations?
There was one conversation where he expressed concern that there was a perception amongst the boys that I was bisexual.
And what else happened?
He suggested I act more like him.
Did he give you any more details about how you should act more like him?
No.
Did this conversation occur, to your memory, shortly after the 23rd of November 1988?
I can't say for certain whether it was before or after, but I just recall that it was outside the admin area, between the admin area and the football field on the road. It was a bit of a chance meeting. He was walking one way, I was walking another. And I have a sort of recollection that it was warm.
Indicating sometime perhaps around
Yes.
summer or
Yes.
certainly not winter. Do you have a recollection that the conversation occurred sometime around your departure from McNeil House?
No, I can't say that with any certainty.
Do you ever recall speaking to Dr. Hawkes about the incident involving ARN?
No.
Do you remember that towards the end of 1988, Dr. Patterson told you that you had to leave your position as resident master of McNeil House?
No, that wasn't my recollection.
Do you remember?
If I could clarify that, though.
Certainly.
I have a vague memory of him suggesting or offering the Woodville property in the way that he said he needed someone to look after the Woodville property.
Why, to your knowledge, was he offering you a position in the Woodville property?
Because he needed someone down there.
Do you say that you
That's
have?
the way it was expressed to me.
Do you say that you have no recollection of a discussion with Dr. Patterson about you taking yourself out of McNeil House in the period in about the week following 23 November 1988?
No. My recollection is that it occurred either at the end of the academic year or during the holidays, and that's when I moved there.
Could tab 15 of the tender bundle please be shown? Just scroll to the bottom if you would. See, this is a letter, Mr. Fotis, written to you by Dr. Patterson, if you scroll up the top, 24 February 1989. See that?
Yes.
And he tells you you'll need to be out of Woodville by week 7.
Yes.
Woodville's the property you mentioned in your evidence a moment ago.
Yes.
That was a a building which could be used from time to time as a residence by some teachers?
It could be, yes. As I understood it, I was possibly the first person to move in there. So at that stage, it was a very novel residence.
That's where you were residing at the time you received this letter, though, correct?
I should think so, yes.
And what Dr. Patterson was doing was telling you needed to be out of there by week 7.
Yes. I understood it wasn't to be permanent, it was fairly temporary. That property had been purchased by the school for the purposes of converting it to an admin centre, and they were in the process of submitting plans or getting approval for that to be converted. And as such, it was always my understanding that it was going to be a fairly temporary stay there.
You see in the second paragraph of this letter, Dr. Patterson says, no boys, of course, in or around house at any time.
Yes.
And the next paragraph, please remove yourself completely from the boarding houses and only use the dining room for meals.
Yes.
Would you agree that those matters in the paragraphs 2 and 3 of this letter are pretty serious things for the headmaster of the school to be saying to you?
No, I think it's complete common sense and unexceptional.
Why is it common sense and unexceptional for you to be directed by the headmaster not to have any boys, of course, in or around house at any time?
Because Woodville was a separate property outside the gates of Knox Grammar, and as such, boys would effectively be truanting unless they had special permission to go down there.
Well, what about the next paragraph then? Please remove yourself completely from the boarding houses
Yes?
and only use the dining room for meals.
Well, yes. If I wasn't a resident master there, then that follows as being quite unexceptional also.
Do you recall having discussions with Dr. Patterson about the directions in paragraphs 2 and 3 of this letter before 24 February 1989?
No.
You say
well,
you just...
well, hold on. It may be mentioned that as part of looking after Woodville, that I would be entitled to meals at the dining room.
Do you say that to the extent this letter involves a direction by Dr. Patterson for you to remove yourself completely from the boarding houses, that particular matter had not been discussed with him prior to you receiving the letter?
It was implied that in moving to Woodville, I would be removing myself from the boarding house. I would no longer be residing there.
Wasn't this letter, to your knowledge, caused by the suspicion that you were the person guilty of the assault on ARN?
No.
Objection.
And so when you got this letter, did you make any inquiries of Dr. Patterson about why it was that you had to remove yourself completely from the boarding houses?
No, it seemed unexceptional to me, looking at it now. I don't have a direct recollection of actually seeing this letter, but I don't dispute that I would have received it in my pigeonhole perhaps, but it didn't rate as something being extremely important. It seems quite unexceptional, quite consistent with the arrangement to move to Woodville and look after it.
You continued in your role as a religious education teacher throughout 1989, correct?
Yes.
And you continued in your employment at the school, though not as a resident master, until about October of that year.
That's right.
I'll defer for one moment asking you some questions about the circumstances of your departure from Knox, but I'll ask you this question. Do you remember a Mr. Probert?
Yes, I do.
Do you remember at some point in your time at Knox, Mr. Probert finding you in the laundry room late at night?
No, I don't remember.
Do you remember an incident where you were in the laundry room late at night doing something with the boys' socks?
No, I don't remember such an incident.
Do you remember any incident where you were in the laundry room late at night?
No, I don't.
Do you deny that there was an incident where you were in the laundry room late one night and discovered by Mr. Probert with the boys' socks?
I deny that, yes.
You sure about that?
Yes.
Do you ever remember anyone in authority speaking to you in relation to that incident?
No.
Do you recall going and seeing, or I withdraw that, do you recall attending to witness Dr. Hawkes administer the cane to boys from time to time?
Not from time to time. I only have recollection of one. And that was the first night I did resident master's duty at McNeil. Dr. Hawkes encouraged me to make it clear that I wouldn't tolerate misbehaviour, and he said if there is any slightest misbehaviour, send them down to me and I'll deal with them. And there was a little bit of misbehaviour after the lights out, and I did send a boy down there, and I thought at the time it would be for Dr. Hawkes to deal with it. And Dr. Hawkes asked me to stay and witness it.
And what happened?
The boy was caned on the backside.
With what?
A cane.
Not a pool cue.
No.
Your Honour, without entering into territory which is likely to elicit an objection from Ms. Bateman, those are the questions I had for Mr. Fotis. And so, if it's convenient, could you take the morning break and return to deal with that matter?
All right, thank you. We'll take a 20-minute break.